There is a specific kind of quiet that settles over a house at 2 a.m. when you have a newborn. It isn't peaceful. It's the quiet of someone holding their breath. Everything is listening, the walls, the monitor on the nightstand, especially you. You are a raw nerve in a bathrobe and you haven't slept more than 90 minutes in a row for 6 weeks and your entire nervous system has been rewired into one single function. Hear the baby, respond to the baby, keep the baby alive. That was my life the night it happened. My husband worked nights, hospital maintenance, 12-hour shifts, 3 nights a week. I used to love those quiet evenings before the baby came. Whole hours of silence, the house to myself, nothing louder than the television. Now those same nights felt different. The silence had weight. The house felt bigger than it should. She had finally gone down at 1:40 a.m. I know the exact time because I checked my phone the way you do when a baby sleeps, the way a prisoner checks the clock. Desperate and disbelieving, I put her in the bassinet. I stood over her for probably 2 full minutes just watching her chest rise and fall. Then I went downstairs to do the one thing I hadn't managed to do all day, which was eat something that wasn't a granola bar over the sink. The kitchen light was too bright. I remember that. I had it on the dimmer, turned all the way down, and even that felt harsh. I was standing at the counter eating leftover pasta cold from the container. The baby monitor was on the counter beside me, the kind with the little screen so you can see the infrared image of her in the bassinet. She was still. Small gray shape under a small gray blanket. The counter, the monitor, the pasta. That was the whole world at 2:03 a.m. Then someone knocked on the front door. 3 knocks. Slow. Not frantic, not the knock of someone in trouble. Deliberate. Like someone who had all the time in the world and had decided, specifically, to use it on my front door at 2 in the morning. I put the container down. My first thought, and I want to be clear that I am a practical person, I grew up in a house where my mother taught me not to catastrophize, where the answer to every fear was a rational explanation. My first thought was that something had happened to my husband. Car accident. Emergency. Someone coming to tell me in person because my phone had been on silent. I went to the door. We had a peephole. I looked through it. The porch light was on. It covered the whole front step, the railing, the top of the path. I could see all of it clearly. There was nobody there. I stood with my eye at the peephole for a long moment. Looked left, looked right as far as the fisheye lens would let me. Parked car across the street I didn't recognize. A neighbor's motion sensor light, off. Nothing moving. I told myself, kids. A prank. Someone's teenager thinking it was funny. I told myself this very firmly. I told myself the rational explanation was always the boring one. I stepped back from the door. And that was when the monitor screen on the counter behind me changed. I didn't hear anything from it at first. What I saw was the picture, her little gray shape, and she had moved. She was awake. She had pushed the blanket down and was lying there with her eyes open. And I could see even on that small screen, even in that washed-out infrared green, that she was completely still. Not crying. Not fussing. Just lying there with her eyes open, looking up. Babies do that sometimes. Wake and stare. It doesn't always mean anything. But then the monitor made a sound. Not her. Not her breathing. Not a whimper. Not a sleep sound. The monitor picked up something else in the room. A shift in the audio. And then, very clearly, in a voice that was not my daughter's, not a glitch, not static. A voice that was low and close to the microphone, the way a voice sounds when someone leans down towards something small. She's beautiful. I have spent 3 years trying to find another explanation for what I heard. I have replayed it in my head so many times the memory feels worn, like a tape played too often. I have thought about radio frequency interference, about cross signals, about the neighbor with the baby monitor they mentioned at the block party 18 months ago. I have tried all of them on and none of them fit, because radio interference doesn't whisper. It doesn't have breath behind it. It doesn't say something that specific, that soft, that directed. I grabbed my daughter out of that bassinet before I'd consciously decided to move. I don't remember crossing the room. I just remember having her in my arms, pressing her against my chest, and standing in the center of that room with every light in the house on, which I must have hit on the way through because the whole upstairs blazed. And she looked up at me with those dark, unfocused newborn eyes completely unbothered, and I stood there shaking. I called my husband. He didn't pick up. I called him 4 more times. I called my sister on the other side of the country at 2 a.m., and she stayed on the phone with me until he got home at 6:15. We checked every room. We checked the closets, under the beds, the basement. We found nothing. No sign of entry. No open window, no disturbed lock. He called the non-emergency police line, and they sent someone around who walked the perimeter and told us there was no indication of anyone having been near the property. She was polite about it. She had the practiced tone of someone who has reassured many anxious new parents in the small hours, and I could see her doing exactly that. Filing us away into a category, closing the tab. Before she left, she said that baby monitors, especially the older digital ones, can sometimes pick up broadcasts from nearby devices. Walkie-talkies, other monitors, the occasional CB radio. She didn't say anything about why a CB radio would be broadcasting a whispered sentence in the middle of the night. She didn't address that part. I didn't push it because I was holding my daughter and I didn't want to say the words out loud in front of her. My husband had the monitor replaced that week. New brand, new frequency, encrypted signal. He did it in the way that men who love you sometimes do things, quickly, practically, without discussion, because he knew that doing something concrete was the only language that would reach me right then. We never heard it again. She's 4 now. She is loud and funny and obsessed with a particular type of small plastic horse, and she has my eyes and his laugh, and she is, genuinely, the best thing I have ever done. She doesn't know any of this happened. She was 6 weeks old. She was lying in her bassinet with her eyes open, looking up at the ceiling, perfectly calm. That's the part one come back to. Not the knock. Not the voice. The way she was looking up. Calm and still, the way babies are sometimes calm and still when they're not alone. The way she didn't make a sound until I picked her up. I don't use the monitor anymore. We got a different one, like I said, the new one, the encrypted one, the one my husband researched for 2 days and installed himself. It sits on the dresser and the light blinks green to tell me it's working. And I trust it, I do. I just don't look at the screen at night. The thing about being deaf is that you develop a relationship with your house that hearing people never think about. You know it through your feet. You know the specific vibration of the refrigerator cycling on, the way the washing machine on spin makes the kitchen floor hum all the way to the back wall, the particular shudder that runs through the floorboards when a heavy truck passes on the street outside. You map your home in frequencies. You live in it differently, more completely in some ways because you are always in contact with it, sole of foot to floor, palm to countertop, spine to the back of a chair, and it is always in contact with you. I knew my apartment the way a blind person knows a familiar room. Precisely. Personally. That's why I knew immediately that what I felt on that Tuesday afternoon was wrong. I had lived in that apartment for 2 years. 3rd floor of a brownstone, Philadelphia, the kind of building that was old enough to have its own grammar. Plaster walls, uneven oak floors, a clawfoot tub that the landlord had painted over so many times you could see the brushstrokes stacked up like geology. I loved it genuinely. I had calibrated every vibration in it. I knew the upstairs neighbor's footsteps the way you know a familiar song. His heavy, flat-footed walk from bedroom to kitchen every morning at 7, the particular bounce in his step when he was in a good mood, the slower drag of it on late nights. I knew the couple on the 2nd floor argued on Thursdays. I knew the building's old boiler sent a low tremor up through the east wall every time it kicked on. I knew all of it. I had been learning it for 2 years without trying to. It was a Tuesday in February, around 2:30 in the afternoon. Gray daylight through the windows. I remember the light specifically because February light in Philadelphia is a particular shade of defeated. Not dark enough to feel like evening. Not bright enough to feel like day. I was at my desk by the window working. My laptop in front of me, a cup of tea gone cold beside it, my vibration mat under my feet. It's a pressure-sensitive pad that translates certain sounds into tactile signals. A soft pulse for the doorbell, 2 pulses for the phone. Standard equipment. I'd had it for years. I was not thinking about the bathroom. The bathroom was at the end of the hall. Door locked. I always locked it, habit from years of shared housing. Nobody was in the apartment except me. I had been home since 11 and nobody had come in. I had 1 key and it was hanging on the hook beside the front door where I always put it. The windows were closed. It was February. The vibration started at 2:34 p.m. I know the time because my laptop clock was visible and I looked at it reflexively when the mat pulsed under my feet. But this was not the doorbell pulse, not the phone pulse. This was something different, heavier, rhythmic, a footstep pattern coming through the floor, traveling up through my chair, up through the desk legs, into my palms where they rested on the keyboard. Slow, heavy, deliberate steps, the kind of weight that belongs to a person, coming from inside the bathroom. I lifted my hands off the keyboard and sat very still. I do that when I'm trying to isolate a vibration, remove as much contact as I can, reduce the noise, let one signal come through cleanly. The steps continued. For 5, 6. Moving in a short path, the bathroom was small, maybe 8 feet by 6, there was only so far you could go. Back and forth, back and forth. Then they stopped. Stopped directly in front of the bathroom door. I was sitting maybe 12 feet away down the hall. I could see the door from my desk. The bottom of it had a half-inch gap, the old kind where the door had warped slightly in its frame over the years, and in the gray February light coming from the window behind me, that gap should have been a thin strip of lighter gray, the bathroom's small window letting in whatever flat daylight there was. It was dark. Not off the light dark. Not the dark of a room with a closed blind. The dark of something filling that gap. Something standing on the other side of the door close enough to block the light. I did not move for a very long time. I am telling this plainly because there is no other way to tell it. I am a practical person. I was assessed for anxiety disorder twice in my 20s and cleared both times. I am not prone to misinterpretation of sensory information. If anything, I over-index toward rational explanation, because I grew up in a world that was quick to assume my perception was faulty, and I learned early to be rigorous about what I knew versus what I was guessing. So I sat at my desk at 2:34 on a Tuesday in February, and I looked at the dark strip under my locked bathroom door, and I ran through every possible explanation I could construct. The blind. Wind moving the blind, casting a shadow at floor level. Except the bathroom blind was fully up. I had raised it that morning because the room faced north and needed all the light it could get. A bag. Something I'd left on the floor close to the door. Except I had been in the bathroom an hour earlier and the floor was clear. A trick of the light. February light. Defeated light. Except light doesn't move in and then hold still. Shadows shift. This wasn't shifting. I picked up my phone. I opened the camera. Not to call anyone, I was trying to buy myself a technical buffer, a lens between me and whatever this was, because something in me understood that looking through a screen would be easier than looking with my eyes. I turned on the flashlight function. The hallway lit up. The door was still closed. The dark strip was still there. Then I did something I still can't fully explain. I pressed record and set the phone on the desk, propped against the cold tea mug, lens facing down the hall. And I waited. 11 minutes. I know it was 11 minutes because the timestamp is on the footage. I sat at my desk for 11 minutes with my phone recording the bathroom door, and the shadow did not move. Did not shift, did not thin out, did not behave the way shadows behave when the light source changes. It was simply there, occupying that space with the patience of something that did not need to breathe. At minute 11, it was gone. The strip of gray came back, just like that, like a light switching on, except nothing had switched on. I walked down the hall. I unlocked the bathroom door, the lock turned from my side. It had not been turned from inside. The little mechanism works in only one direction and it was still fully engaged. I pushed the door open. The bathroom was empty, cold. The window was latched. The floor was clean. Nothing had been moved, nothing disturbed. The soap dish and the towel and the small succulent on the windowsill exactly as I had left them. I reviewed the footage that evening. There is a clear, visible, unambiguous dark line under the door for the full 11 minutes. It doesn't flicker. It doesn't have an edge that moves the way a shadow's edge moves when its source shifts. It just sits there. And at the 11-minute mark, it's gone. One frame it's there, the next frame it isn't. I sent the video to 2 friends, separately, without explaining what I wanted them to notice. Both of them responded within the hour. One said, "Why is there someone standing in your bathroom?" The other said, "What is that under the door?" I showed it to the landlord. He watched it 3 times. He said the building was old and light did strange things in old buildings, and he said this in the voice of a man filling space with words. He offered to have someone look at the bathroom window latch. I said the latch was fine. He nodded and left, and we did not discuss it again. I called the police non-emergency line, and I want to be accurate about how that conversation went. The officer I spoke to was not unkind. She asked if I had found any sign of entry. I said no. She asked if anything had been taken. I said no. She asked if I had seen anyone. I said I had seen a shadow under a locked door for 11 minutes and I had footage of it. She said she could send someone to check the premises. I said yes. They came, they walked through, they found nothing, they left. I still have the footage. It is on a hard drive in my current apartment, in a drawer in the second bedroom, in a box I have not opened in 2 years. I moved out of that brownstone 6 months after it happened. I told everyone it was for more space, a shorter commute, a better neighborhood. All of those things are technically true. I think about the 11 minutes more than I think about the shadow itself. That's the part one can't put down. Not what it was. How long it stood there. How long it had decided to stay. How long. And this is the part that comes at me sideways sometimes, in ordinary moments at a desk, hands on a keyboard, feet flat on the floor of a different apartment in a different building that I am slowly, carefully learning. How long it might have been standing there before I felt the footsteps. Before I happened to pay attention. Whether Tuesday was the first time or just the first time I knew. 19 days. I want to start there because that number matters. Not 3 days, not a week, 19 consecutive days of the same thing, and for the first 14 of them I did nothing. I documented nothing. I told nobody. I am a critical care nurse with 11 years of experience, and I have held the hands of people who were dying, and I have not flinched, and I have not cried on the floor until I got home, and I have always trusted my own clinical judgment. So when something started happening in my apartment that I could not explain, my first instinct was not fear. It was to diagnose myself. Sleep deprivation causes auditory hallucinations. I knew that before I ever set foot in a nursing school. Prolonged sleep disruption, the kind that comes from working 3 consecutive night shifts, 12 hours each, then trying to flip your body clock back to daytime for your days off, creates perceptual disturbances that are well documented, clinically understood, and absolutely nothing to call anyone about. You hear things. You see movement in your peripheral vision. You have moments of hypnagogic confusion where the border between sleep and waking goes soft and unreliable. It happens. It happens to nurses, to pilots, to long-haul drivers. It is a known side effect of the schedule I had chosen. That was my working diagnosis for the first week. Occupational hazard. Document, monitor, reassess. I had been in the apartment on the 11th floor for 8 months. Chicago winter, windows sealed, the radiator keeping everything at a steady, uncomfortable warmth that I had never quite adjusted to. I worked nights at the ICU, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and slept days when I could, which meant blackout curtains, white noise machine, phone on Do Not Disturb. My bedroom was small and efficient the way I liked things. Bed, dresser, nightstand, one plant I kept forgetting to water. The wall behind the headboard was a shared wall with the unit next door, which as far as I could tell was occupied by someone who kept extremely quiet hours and whom I had never seen in the hallway. The scratching started on a Wednesday, not animal scratching. I need to be specific about that because the word scratching does things to people's imaginations, and what they picture is usually a mouse or a squirrel in the walls, something small and frantic with small frantic claws. This was not that. This was slow, methodical, the pace of something that was not in a hurry because it had nowhere else to be. It came from inside the wall, roughly level with where my head was on the pillow, and it moved, not randomly, not in the scattered way a trapped animal moves, but in a consistent pattern. Down and then across, down and then across, like something drawing lines. I lay there the first morning and listened to it for approximately 4 minutes before my alarm went off at 3 in the afternoon. And the scratching stopped. Not faded. Not slowed down and tapered off the way an animal might startle and freeze. Stopped. Clean. Immediate. The alarm sounded and the scratching was done, as though whatever was making it had been waiting for exactly that signal. I noted it. Told myself pipes, old building, radiator system, thermal expansion in the walls. Told myself the timing was coincidence. Went about my day. It happened again Thursday. Same wall, same place, same slow methodical pattern. stopped the instant my alarm fired. I lay there for a moment after it stopped, and I had the first small uncomfortable thought that I pushed away immediately. The thought that the timing was too clean. That coincidence has a texture, a looseness, a slight imprecision, and this didn't have that. This was exact. But I was a tired woman with a demanding job, and I had a working hypothesis, and I wasn't ready to abandon it yet. By day 7, I had started keeping a log. Not because I was frightened, I genuinely was not yet, but because I am a person who charts things, who finds comfort in data, who believes that if you record something carefully enough it will eventually tell you what it is. Nurse's habit. Time, duration, pattern, any variation. Every morning I wrote it down in the Notes app on my phone. I have that log still. I have looked at it many times since. What it shows is this: 19 entries, 19 consecutive days. Scratching begins between 3 and 4 minutes before my alarm. Scratching ends within 2 seconds of the alarm sounding. Pattern consistent, location consistent, no variation. 18 of those entries end with the same 3 words. Alarm. It stopped. On day 14 something shifted in me. I lay there in the dark with the scratching happening inside the wall 12 inches from my head, and I felt, for the first time, properly afraid. Not the intellectual discomfort of an unexplained data point. Actual fear. The kind that moves through your chest and sits there. Because 14 days is too long for coincidence, and I knew it, and I had known it for days, and I had been arguing with myself about it in the way you argue with yourself when the conclusion you're approaching is one you don't want to reach. I called my building manager that afternoon. Told her I thought there might be something in the wall. Rodent, possibly a bird that had found a gap in the exterior. She said she'd put in a maintenance request. Maintenance came 2 days later. A man named whoever he was who knocked on the wall in 3 places, pressed his ear against it, and told me he didn't hear anything. I told him it only happened in the early hours of the morning. He said he'd make a note. The scratching continued on day 16, day 17, day 18. On day 19 it stopped on its own. Not with the alarm, not at its usual time. Just wasn't there when I woke up at 2:30 in the morning to use the bathroom. Lying in bed afterward waiting for it to start, and it didn't. I fell asleep eventually. My alarm went off at 3:15. Silence. I don't know why the silence that morning was worse than the scratching. Shouldn't have been, but it was. I lay there in the dark with my alarm still sounding, and I felt the absence of it like a held breath. Like the moment before something changes. The building manager called me the next afternoon. Maintenance had gone back with a thermal scope. Something about a tenant above me complaining of cold spots. Unrelated issue. Same crew doing a sweep of the floor. The scope had shown an anomaly in the wall behind my headboard. A gap in the insulation. A section of drywall that was slightly warmer than the surrounding wall. They opened it on a Thursday morning. I was home when they did it. I had asked to be. I stood in the doorway of my own bedroom and watched a maintenance worker cut a neat rectangle out of the wall behind where I slept, and I told myself there would be nothing there, and I told myself this very firmly, and I was wrong. The gap behind the drywall was roughly 4 feet wide and ran the full height of the room. A dead space in the building's original construction, the kind that gets sealed up during renovation and forgotten. Someone had been inside it. That was not a conclusion I am drawing from imagination. That is what the maintenance worker said, out loud, in a flat voice that told me he had not expected to say it. There was a sleeping bag, compacted down and pushed to one side. There were food wrappers, the specific brands from the vending machines 2 floors down. I recognized them. There was a phone charger coiled neatly around a brick. No phone attached. A bottle of water, empty. Pair of gloves. And there was a piece of paper, folded once, set on top of the sleeping bag with the care of something deliberately placed. The maintenance worker unfolded it. He looked at it. He looked at me. He turned it around. It was a handwritten list of dates and times. 6 weeks of dates going back further than the scratching had started. My shift schedule, every night I had worked, every morning I had come home, the exact hours logged with a precision that matched my actual schedule to the minute. It was in my handwriting. I need you to understand that I know my own handwriting. I have been writing in the same hand for 30 years. The pressure, the slant, the way I make a 7 with a crossbar through the stem. That list was written by my hand. I had never seen it before in my life. I had not written it. There is no version of events in which I wrote it. The police were called. The space was photographed, documented, treated as a scene. They found no fingerprints on the paper. They found trace evidence that the space had been occupied by a single individual for an estimated 4 to 6 weeks. They never found who it was. They never found a point of entry that made structural sense. The gap had been sealed on both sides and nobody could explain how it had been accessed. They also could not explain the handwriting. I moved out within the week. I'm in a different city now. Ground floor unit, no shared walls on the bedroom side. I had the walls sounded before I signed the lease. Tapped along every surface in the bedroom while the landlord watched me with the expression of a man who had never been asked to do this before. I slept with the light on for 4 months. I still set my alarm for 3:15. Old habit, hard to break. And sometimes, in the few minutes before it goes off, in that specific half-conscious space between sleeping and waking, I find myself listening for something on the other side of the wall. The absence of it should be a relief. It mostly is. She was buried with it. I need to say that first because everything else depends on you understanding that fact with the same certainty I had when I drove up to that house. Not stored somewhere. Not left behind in a drawer. Buried. I placed it in the casket myself in the specific way she had asked me to. Wrapped in the blue cloth she kept it in, positioned in the crook of her left arm the way she had described in the letter she left with her attorney. I am a structural engineer. I deal in physical reality for a living. I measure things, I verify things, I do not proceed on assumption when certainty is available. I watched the casket close. I watched it go into the ground. I put my hand flat on the soil afterward, the way you do when you don't know what else to do with your hands, and I stood there until my wife touched my arm and told me it was time to go. That was 11 days before I went back to the house. I had avoided it deliberately. There were things that needed doing, the estate, the paperwork, the particular bureaucratic machinery that grinds into motion when someone dies and that requires signatures and phone calls and decisions about furniture. I had been handling all of it from a distance, by phone and email, the way I handled problems I didn't want to be inside. My sister had offered to come with me when I finally had to go through the house, and I had told her I was fine. I preferred to do it alone. I would be one night and out by morning. Both of those things were true when I said them. I got there at 7:30 in the evening. Late October, so the dark came early, and the house sat at the end of a gravel road in rural Tennessee with the nearest neighbor a quarter-mile back, and the trees had mostly turned and some had already dropped, and the whole property had the specific atmosphere of a place that knew it was being evaluated for the last time. I had grown up in that house. Every room had a version of me in it that I wasn't sure I wanted to meet. I sat in the car in the driveway for probably 5 minutes before I went inside. The house smelled like her. That was the first thing. Not perfume, not anything identifiable, just the base note smell of a place that had held one person for 40 years, the smell of her soap and her particular brand of tea and something underneath that I cannot name except to say it was her, and walking into it was like walking into a conversation that had been paused mid-sentence. I had a list. I worked through it methodically the way I work through everything, ground floor first, room by room. Note what needs to stay for the estate sale, note what needs to go to storage, note what needs to be dealt with specifically. I was functioning. I was doing what needed doing. I had a system and I stayed inside it because the system was the only thing between me and the fact that I was alone in my dead mother's house at night, and every light I turned on felt like an apology. By 11 I had done the ground floor and the study, and I had found 3 things I needed to keep, and I had cried once, briefly, in the kitchen over nothing in particular. A notepad on the counter with a grocery list in her handwriting, eggs and bread, and the particular brand of decaf she switched to after her diagnosis. I stood there and looked at it, and then I folded it and put it in my jacket pocket, and I went back to work. I went upstairs at 11:30 to take the bedroom. Her room was at the end of the hall, door closed. I stood outside it for a moment with my hand on the frame. This is the kind of detail that feels melodramatic when you say it out loud, and I am aware of that. I am telling it anyway because it was real. I stood there and took a breath and opened the door. The room was as she had left it. The bed made with the particular geometric precision she had always insisted on. The photographs on the dresser in their specific arrangement. I had grown up looking at those photographs in that exact order, and the order had never changed in 40 years. The armchair by the window she had read in every evening for as long as I could remember. the fabric worn smooth on the right armrest where she had always rested her hand. And on the nightstand, her reading lamp, switched off. I started with the dresser. I was making notes on my phone, methodical, one drawer at a time. I had my back to the door, facing the window. The room was quiet in the way that old rural houses are quiet. Not silent, because silence is a city concept, because out there you get the trees and sometimes an animal and the particular low-frequency nothing of a lot of open space. But quiet, settled. I heard it at 10 minutes past midnight. Music, faint, coming from below. From the kitchen or the hallway, or somewhere on the ground floor that I had left dark and empty 40 minutes earlier. A single repeating melody, thin and delicate and mechanical, the kind of sound that has a slight imperfection in the loop, a tiny stutter at the end of the phrase before it begins again, the kind that comes from a small metal mechanism rotating against small metal tines. I knew what it was before I had consciously processed it. She had a music box. She had owned it since before I was born. A small dark wooden thing about the size of a hardback book, a pastoral scene inlaid on the lid in lighter wood, a brass winding key on the back that she kept meaning to replace because it had gotten stiff over the years. She played it once a year. On my birthday, every birthday of my life that I was in that house, she would take it from the shelf in the sitting room and wind it and set it on the kitchen table, and we would sit there while it played, and it was not a significant ritual, it was not something we ever discussed, it was just something she did every year without comment, and I had absorbed it the way you absorb the furniture of your childhood without knowing you're doing it. The piece it played was not a famous melody. I have never heard it anywhere else. I would recognize it in a concert hall from 2 notes. I was hearing it now, coming from 1 floor below, in a house I had walked through 40 minutes ago. I stood in the middle of her bedroom and I did not move for a long time. Here is what I knew. I knew I had packed that music box into her casket 3 weeks earlier. I had taken it from the sitting room shelf myself on the morning of the funeral, wrapped it in the blue cloth from her bedside drawer, placed it in the casket in the crook of her left arm as the letter had instructed. I had watched the lid come down. The music box was in the ground 11 miles from where I was standing. Here is what I also knew. The music was playing. I am not a person who has ever had any patience for explanations that require me to abandon physical reality. I have spent my career in a discipline that is not forgiving of wishful thinking. If a load-bearing wall cannot support the structure above it, the structure falls. There is no negotiating with it. There is no narrative that makes it hold. And I stood in that bedroom and I applied every gram of that training to what I was hearing, and I could not make it stop being what it was. I went downstairs. I want to be honest about the state I was in when I did that. I was not calm. I was not composed. I descended those stairs in the specific way that you move when your body has made a decision that your mind is still debating, one hand on the wall, and the music got clearer as I came down, cleaner, the little stutter in the loop more audible, and I turned into the kitchen and found the light switch and pressed it. The music box was on the kitchen table, open, the lid raised, the brass cylinder turning slowly, the tines catching the light. It was the same box. I do not mean one like it. I mean the same box, the same pastoral scene on the lid, the same worn patch on the lower right corner where the finish had rubbed away over decades of handling, the same stiff brass key on the back, the same box I had wrapped in the same blue cloth and placed in my mother's casket with my own hands. It was on the kitchen table, and beside it, positioned at the edge of the table closest to her usual chair, was a ceramic mug. Her mug, the one with the small chip on the handle she had always meant to throw away and never did. I had seen that mug on the drying rack when I came in. I was certain of that. I had noticed it specifically because it was hers. I reached out and I touched the side of the mug. It was warm, not residual warmth, not the ghost of something made hours ago. Warm the way a mug is warm when the tea inside it has been recently poured. I pulled my hand back. I looked at the mug. I looked at the music box still turning on the table. The melody played through its loop and stuttered at the end and began again, and I stood in my dead mother's kitchen at 12 minutes past midnight and my legs stopped working. I sat down on the floor. Not a dramatic collapse. Just a slow, deliberate sitting down, back against the cabinet, legs out in front of me, because standing seemed like something that required a reason and I had temporarily run out of them. I don't know how long I sat there. The music box wound down eventually, the melody slowed, thickened, the notes stretching further apart the way they do when the mechanism is losing tension. and then it stopped. The kitchen was quiet. The mug was on the table. I did not touch it again. I sold the house the following morning, called the realtor from the driveway at 7 a.m., and accepted the standing offer I had been deliberating on for 2 weeks. I did not go back inside. My wife knows I sold it quickly. She knows I don't talk about that night. She has asked me once, carefully, what happened in the house, and I told her I found it harder than I expected and that I needed to be done with it. She accepted that. She is a kind person, and she gave me the space I was asking for. What was in the mug? I looked before I left the kitchen. I want to be precise about that. I did not flee. I am an engineer. I looked. I have never told her what was in it. I have never told anyone. I want to be upfront about something before I tell you this. I am not the kind of person this happens to. I don't mean that as a brag. I mean it as context because I think it matters. I have driven the same route to the same accounts for 11 years. I eat at chain restaurants because I know what I'm getting. I have never read a horoscope with any intention other than mild contempt. My wife calls me the most boring person she has ever loved, and she means it affectionately, and I take it as a compliment. I believe in receipts, I believe in mileage logs, I believe in things I can put my hands on. I am telling you this so you understand what it cost me to check out of that hotel at 1 in the morning and drive 4 hours home in the dark. It was a Wednesday in March. I was in a mid-sized city about 230 miles from home, the kind of city that exists primarily as a waypoint, the kind with a downtown that has 3 good years left in it and a ring of chain hotels off the highway interchange that are all identical in the way that chain hotels are identical, which is to say completely, aggressively by design. I had stayed in that specific hotel probably 6 or 7 times over the years. Same room type every time, king bed, 2nd or 3rd floor, somewhere in the middle of the building away from the elevator because I sleep light. Nothing had ever happened there that was worth remembering. That was the whole point. I checked in on Wednesday afternoon, dropped my bag, went to the client dinner, came back at 10:15. Standard. I had an 8:30 meeting the next morning and I needed 6 hours and a shower, and that was the entire plan. The room was 414. 4th floor, middle of the corridor, exactly what I asked for. I remember the room number because I looked at it on the key card when the woman at the desk handed it to me and thought, without any particular feeling, 4th floor, good. Away from the street noise. Fine. I was asleep by 11. I woke up at 1:10. Not gradually, the way you sometimes surface out of a dream in stages, but immediately, completely, the way you wake up when something external has pulled you out. I lay in the dark for a moment trying to identify what it was. Road noise. Someone in the corridor. The ice machine 2 doors down that these hotels always have and always put somewhere inconvenient. I ran through the list the way I do. I am a light sleeper and I have a system. Then I heard it. It was coming from the heating vent above the desk in the corner of the room. A low, flat sound. A hum, not mechanical, not the white noise hum of the HVAC system doing its job, but a human voice. A child's voice. Tuneless, rhythmless. No melody I could identify. Not singing a song. Not crying. Not talking. Just producing a sustained tone with occasional slight variations. The way a child hums when they are alone and occupied with something and not thinking about the sound they are making. I turned the lamp on. The vent was a standard rectangular return air grill, maybe 12 inches by 8, mounted high on the wall above the desk. I lay in bed and looked at it for a moment, and then I got up and crossed the room and stood underneath it and listened. It was clearer from there. Definitely a voice. Definitely coming from inside the ductwork. Definitely a child. My first thought was, thin walls, sound travels, some family on the floor has a kid who can't sleep. This is the thought I wanted to have, and so I had it first and I gave it a fair evaluation. But the vent was a return air duct. Sound doesn't carry into return air ducts from adjacent rooms. They pull air in, they don't transmit laterally. I know this because I spent 3 years early in my career selling HVAC equipment, and I know more about ductwork than any sane person should. The sound was inside the duct, coming down the duct, from somewhere above or beyond. I called the front desk. I checked my phone while it was ringing, 1:17 in the morning. The man who answered had the voice of someone managing a very quiet night and not minding it. I told him I was in room 414 and there appeared to be a child in the ventilation system, or near it, and I was aware of how that sounded, but the sound was clear and had been going for several minutes. He put me on hold, came back after about a minute, told me there were no children registered on the 4th floor. I asked about the 3rd floor, the 5th floor. He checked. No children registered on any adjacent floor. He offered to send someone up. I said yes. The maintenance man arrived in about 8 minutes. By the time he knocked, I had been standing underneath that vent for the full 8 minutes, and the humming had not stopped and had not changed in character, and I was feeling something I did not have a word for at the time, which I might now describe as a very quiet, very controlled version of dread. The maintenance man listened at the vent, nodded slowly, got a screwdriver from his belt and removed the grill and shone his phone torch up into the duct. He said there was nothing there. I asked him to keep the light on it for a moment. The humming had stopped when the grill came off. Stopped cleanly, the way sound stops when a door closes, and we both stood there looking up into an empty metal duct with a torch beam showing us nothing. He replaced the grill. He checked the thermostat, the unit under the window, the seal around the bathroom exhaust fan. He did everything you would do if you were a professional trying to be helpful, and he found nothing useful and he left. The room felt different after he left. I am not a person who uses words like atmosphere or energy or presence, and I am not going to start now. What I mean is more specific than that. The room felt observed, the particular quality of a space that has someone in it who is not moving. I have felt it once before, years ago, walking into a client's storeroom that turned out to have a man sleeping behind the shelving units. Not threatening, just occupied. The air in the room has a different character when you are not the only thing breathing in it. I packed my bag. I am not proud of this, and I am not embarrassed by it either. I packed my bag with the particular efficient speed of a man who has made a decision and does not want to give himself time to argue himself out of it. I called the front desk and asked to be moved to a different room, lower floor, different wing. The man at the desk did not ask why. I think my voice told him not to. He gave me 308, 3rd floor, west corridor, other side of the building. I picked up my key card and my bag and I walked down 3 flights of stairs and along a corridor that was empty and overlit the way hotel corridors are always overlit at 1 in the morning, and I found 308 and I let myself in and I put my bag down and I stood in the center of the room for a moment just breathing. The room was standard, identical to 414 in every way that chain hotels are identical. King bed, desk in the corner, heating unit under the window, and above the desk, a return air grill. 12 inches by 8. Standard rectangular vent. I looked at it the way you look at something you are trying not to think about. I turned the lamp on and sat on the edge of the bed and checked my phone. 1:41 a.m. I had a meeting at 8:30. I needed to sleep. I was being ridiculous. I had moved rooms, the issue was resolved. There was a simple explanation I hadn't landed on yet involving sound transmission or a child in a stairwell or something structural about the building I didn't understand and would never need to understand because I would be checked out by 9 tomorrow and back on the highway, and this would become a mildly interesting anecdote for the drive home. I had talked myself most of the way back to horizontal when the sound started. Same vent, same pitch, same tuneless, rhythmless, flat child's hum with its slight variations, its total indifference to melody. Coming from the vent above the desk in a room on a different floor in a different wing of the building. Clearer than it had been in 414, if anything. Closer sounding. As if the distance between us had not increased at all. I sat on the edge of the bed and I listened to it for, 2 minutes, 3. And I noticed something I had not noticed in 414 because I had not been calm enough to notice it, which was this: the hum was not fixed. It was not coming consistently from the vent. It moved slightly, shifted, the way a sound shifts when its source is moving within a confined space. Back and forth. A few feet in one direction, a few feet back. The specific movement of something in a duct that is not large enough to stand up in but large enough to move through on hands and knees. I did not call the front desk. I picked up my bag and my key card and my jacket and I walked downstairs and I put the key card on the front desk without stopping and I pushed through the front door into the cold parking lot and I got in my car and I don't talk about this at conferences. I want to be clear about that up front because I think it matters to the way you receive what I'm about to tell you. I have presented at 11 academic conferences in the last 4 years. I have published in peer-reviewed journals. I have sat on a dissertation committee and told a doctoral candidate that his methodology was too dependent on anecdotal evidence and that if he couldn't quantify it, he couldn't claim it. I believe that. I still believe that. I am telling you this experience not because I have an explanation for it, but because I have 6 weeks of logged data that I cannot explain, and a scientist who sits on data he cannot explain because the data makes him uncomfortable is not a scientist. He's just a man protecting his comfort. So here is the data. I was 27. Second year of my PhD in geology, University of Pennsylvania, working on sediment core analysis. The kind of work that is genuinely fascinating to approximately 11 people in the world and requires long solitary hours in a basement laboratory that most of the department treats as storage. The lab was in the sub-basement of the research building, accessible by a stairwell that most people used about twice a year. My supervisor had an office on the 4th floor. My cohort worked in the shared graduate space on the 2nd floor. I worked in the basement because the core samples were in the basement and because I preferred it, genuinely, the solitude, the specific quality of concentration you get when you are the only person on a floor and the building above you is a distant suggestion. The office adjacent to mine had been sealed for renovation since the previous September. 8 months by the time any of this started. I knew this because there was a facilities notice taped to the door and because I had tried the handle once, in the first week of the semester out of mild curiosity, and it was locked. I had no reason to think about it after that. It was a locked door at the end of a short hallway in a sub-basement. It was simply part of the geography. My setup was straightforward. Desk against the south wall, facing the partition that separated my office from the sealed one. Laptop, external monitor, a mechanical keyboard I had brought from home because the university-issued keyboards felt like typing on wet cardboard. I worked with noise-canceling headphones most of the time, but on the days I was doing detailed analysis, comparing samples, running calculations, building the stratigraphic models that were the actual substance of my thesis, I preferred quiet. Pure quiet. I found that ambient sound, even music, introduced a cognitive load I didn't want when the work required precision. It was a Tuesday in early November. 11 in the morning. I know because I had a departmental meeting at noon that I was trying to finish something before. Gray light from the single high window. The building above me had the particular acoustic quality of a nearly empty Tuesday morning, which is to say I could hear essentially nothing. Just my own keystrokes on the mechanical keyboard, and the hum of the hard drive, and the occasional tick of the heating system in the wall. That is the exact inventory of sounds in the room. I was mid-calculation when I heard it. A second set of keystrokes. Not mine. Or mine but doubled. A half-second behind my own, the way an echo works, except that this was not the acoustic texture of an echo. An echo decays, it has a roundness to it. It carries the room. This was dry and close and immediate. Keystroke for keystroke, matching my own rhythm with the slight delay of something that was listening and responding rather than originating. Coming from the other side of the partition wall. From inside the sealed office. I stopped typing. My keystrokes stopped. The second set continued. 3 more keystrokes. Precise, unhurried. The same mechanical sound as my own board. Then silence. I sat in my chair and I did not move, and I counted the seconds the way I count things when I am trying to stay methodical under conditions that are working against methodical thinking. I got to 40 before I moved. I stood up, walked to the partition wall, and placed my palm flat against it the way I had seen people do in films and had always considered melodramatic. I am telling you that I did it anyway. The wall was cool and dry and told me nothing. I sat back down. I opened a new document and I typed a sentence. 12 keystrokes. I counted as I pressed them. The echo came back. 11 keystrokes, not 12. It dropped the last one, the way a listener will miss the final syllable if they're already composing their response. Then it stopped. I sat with that for a long time. What I felt in that moment was not fear in any recognizable form. It was something more specific and in some ways more disturbing. The feeling of a hypothesis forming that I did not want to confirm, the particular anxiety of a person who has been trained to follow evidence and has arrived at a piece of evidence he would prefer not to follow. I knew what the scientific response was. The scientific response was to test it. Design a controlled observation, eliminate variables, replicate the result. I did not want to replicate the result. I replicated the result. I typed a series of random characters, no pattern, no rhythm, as arrhythmic as I could make it. The echo returned the same sequence with the same half-second delay. I typed in bursts, 3 keystrokes, pause, 7 keystrokes, pause, 1. The echo matched every burst, every pause, every single count. I typed with 2 fingers instead of 10, slowly, each key a deliberate separate action. The echo slowed with me. I typed as fast as I physically could. The echo accelerated. It was not matching my rhythm. It was matching my keystrokes individually. It was reading me in real time. On the 6th test, I stopped mid-sequence, 8 keys into a run of 15. Stopped completely, took my hands off the keyboard and put them in my lap. The echo finished the run. 7 more keystrokes, exactly completing what I had started, as if it knew how many I had intended to press. Then it stopped. I went upstairs and sat in the graduate lounge for 40 minutes and drank a cup of coffee I didn't want and stared at the middle distance while 2 of my cohort had a conversation about someone's defense committee and I heard none of it. I went back down at 12:30. I sat at my desk. I opened my log file. I had been keeping a daily research log, time-stamped, a discipline my supervisor had required in the first year and that I had maintained past the requirement, and I typed 1 line describing what had happened. The echo responded to the typing of that line the same way it had responded to everything else. I noted that in the log too. Over the following 2 weeks, I ran the test formally 14 more times. Different days, different times of day, different keyboards. I borrowed a colleague's laptop twice to eliminate the possibility that something in my own equipment was generating a feedback artifact. I brought a digital audio recorder and captured 6 sessions. On playback, the recorder captured my keystrokes clearly and captured nothing else, which told me either that the source was below the recorder's threshold or that the phenomenon was somehow mechanical rather than acoustic, which made no sense given what it was doing. I checked the facility's schedule twice. The sealed office had no active work orders, no personnel access logged, no equipment installed. I asked the building manager, carefully and without specifics, whether anyone had been accessing the sub-basement corridor. He checked the keycard logs. My card was the only one swiping into that corridor on any of the relevant dates. The sealed office had no key card reader. It was locked with a physical deadbolt. He offered to open it for inspection. I asked him to. He did. Empty. Clean. The renovation materials stacked neatly along one wall. A drop cloth folded on the floor. Dust undisturbed on the windowsill in the particular way that dust settles when it has not been touched. A desk was there, old wood, pushed against the partition wall that was shared with my office. On the desk was an old computer keyboard, disconnected, no device attached to it, the cord coiled neatly beside it. The building manager looked at the keyboard. He looked at the partition wall. He looked at me. Neither of us said anything useful. I finished my PhD. I defended in June of the following year, and the committee passed me, and my supervisor told me afterward over dinner that my core analysis was some of the strongest work the department had produced in a decade, and I sat there with a glass of wine I wasn't tasting and thought about a disconnected keyboard on a desk in a sealed room. I have the audio recordings. I have the logs, all 6 weeks of them, time-stamped, fully documented in the same format I used for my research data, because by the 3rd week it had become research whether I wanted it to or not. I have never published them. I have shown them to one person, a colleague I trust more than most, who listened to the recordings 3 times and then said nothing for a while and then said, "You're sure about the keycard logs?" I said yes. She said, "And the keyboard was disconnected?" I said yes. She looked at the ceiling and exhaled slowly and said, "I don't know what to tell you. Neither do I. I am in a different institution now, different city, different building. My office is on the 3rd floor. I chose it specifically, 3rd floor, open plan, glass walls, colleagues on all sides, the maximum possible amount of company. My new colleagues find me slightly over-sociable for an academic, a little too willing to work in shared spaces, a little too quick to suggest the common room over the private office. I have not told any of them about the basement. Some mornings, when the floor is quiet and I am deep in something that requires precision and the only sound in the room is my own keystrokes, I find myself pausing at odd intervals, lifting my hands off the keyboard a beat early, counting the silence, waiting to see if anything finishes my sentence. It never does. That should be the end of it. That should be the thing that closes the file. It never does, so it was a contained event, a specific location, something about that room or that building or that particular configuration of sealed space and partition wall and old disconnected equipment that produced something I cannot explain but that did not follow me. I know that. I just keep checking. She moved out in February. Took her furniture, her cat, the good cast iron pan we had bought together at a garage sale the previous summer, and approximately 40% of the plants. She was efficient about it. She had a van booked, a friend helping, a new place already arranged. The whole operation took about 4 hours, and she was very kind to me throughout it, and she cried once, briefly, in the kitchen doorway, and then she was gone. I want to be clear that I do not blame her. I have thought about this carefully, the way you think about things that have rearranged your life, turning them over and over looking for a different conclusion, and I always arrive at the same place. If our positions had been reversed, if she had been the one who stayed, the one who chose to stay, I think I would have done exactly what she did. I think I would have packed the cast iron pan and the cat and the plants, and I would have had a van booked before the month was out. I think most people would have. We had lived in the loft for 14 months by the time it happened. Portland, converted warehouse, the kind of building that gets described in listings as full of character, which is a way of saying the windows let in a draft and the pipes know things. 4th floor, open plan, ceiling so high that in winter the warmth pooled up near the rafters and the floor stayed cold no matter what you did. We had divided it informally, her half, my half, a shared kitchen and living space in the middle, the understanding of two people who liked each other and had lived alone long enough to know the value of invisible boundaries. The closet was on my side. It was a large closet, original to the building, built into the east wall, the kind with a heavy sliding door on a rail that was always slightly off its track and required a specific two-handed technique to open without it catching. I kept coats in it, winter things, extra bedding, a box of books I kept meaning to sort through. It was a completely ordinary closet, and I had opened it approximately 400 times over 14 months, and it had never been anything other than a closet. It was a Saturday evening in October. Neither of us was going out, her choice, she had a cold. She was on the couch with a blanket and a book, and I had decided to stay in by association, the way you do when you live with someone and their mood becomes the ambient weather of the evening. I was at my work table on my side of the loft, maybe 15 feet from the closet, doing something I no longer remember, sketching, probably. I was doing a lot of that period. The lamp on my table, the lamp on her side, the rest of the loft in its usual evening dim. The draft from the east windows, which was constant. The pipes, which were intermittently vocal. Standard Saturday night in that apartment. The voice came at around 9. I say around 9 because I did not check the time at the moment it happened. I checked it afterward when I was capable of checking things, and it was 9:14, which means it was sometime just before that. It came from inside the closet. Not muffled in the way that a voice through a wall is muffled. Not distorted by distance or material, clear. Present tense clear, the way a voice is clear when the person speaking is in the same room as you, which in a sense, separated by one sliding door that was slightly off its rail. They said my name. Not my full name. The name itself is not the point. What is the point? What has always been the point whenever I tell this is the form it used. The diminutive. The nickname. A name I had been called by exactly 3 people in my life, all of them family, all of them from a specific geography and a specific period of my childhood. A name I had not heard anyone use since I was 14 years old and moved across the country with my mother, and the geography closed behind me. A name I had never mentioned in that city, in that apartment, to anyone. A name that my roommate, who had known me for 14 months and who I considered a genuine friend, had never heard. It said that name in a tone that I can only describe as conversational. Not calling out, not the raised volume of someone trying to get attention across a distance. The register of someone who is already mid-conversation and is simply directing the next thing they say toward a specific person. Unhurried. Familiar. The tone of something that knew me. I looked up from my work table. From her side of the loft. From the couch, she said, "What was that?" Not, "Did you hear something?" Not, "Was that you?" She had heard it clearly enough to not need to ask whether she had heard it. She was sitting up, the book closed on her lap, looking at the closet. I looked at the closet. The sliding door was fully closed. The lamp on my work table threw a long rectangle of light across the floor that stopped about 2 feet short of the east wall. I said I didn't know. She said, "It said your name." I said, I know. We sat there, the two of us, in the way that two people sit when they are waiting for something to resolve itself into a category they can handle. Waiting for the follow-up sound, the logical continuation that would reframe what we'd heard as something manageable. A neighbor, a television, an audio artifact from someone's phone somewhere in the building. We gave it probably 2 full minutes of that kind of waiting and nothing came. I got up. I am going to be honest and say that I did not want to get up and that I got up anyway because the alternative was sitting at my work table in my own apartment being afraid of a closet, which felt like a line I was not willing to cross. I walked to the closet and I used the two-handed technique on the sliding door and I opened it. Coats, bedding, box of unsorted books, the pull cord for the light hanging in the center, the specific smell of a closed space that has winter coats and old paper in it. Nothing that should not have been there. I pulled the cord. The light came on. I looked at the back wall, the side walls, the floor. I moved the coats aside. I opened the box. Books. Nothing. I slid the door closed and turned around and she was standing behind me, closer than I expected, with her book in her hand and her cold and her blanket abandoned on the couch. And she looked at me with an expression I had not seen on her face in 14 months of living together, which was that she looked genuinely young, stripped of the composure she usually carried. Just a person in her socks on a cold floor who had heard something she couldn't file away. She asked me who Pip was. I told her it was a name I'd had as a child. I told her nobody here knew it. I told her I had not heard it in almost 20 years. She looked at me for a moment and then she looked at the closet and then she looked back at me and she said, "Okay." And that was the whole conversation we had about it that night. We watched something on television, something neither of us tracked, and we went to bed and I lay in the dark and listened to the loft settle and the pipes talk and the east wind work at the windows. She was perfectly pleasant for the next few weeks. There was no rupture, no argument, no confrontation. She simply became, gradually and then completely, a person who was making an exit. Quietly, practically, without drama. She found the new place. She told me over breakfast one Thursday, very reasonably, very kindly. She hoped I understood. She just felt like it was time for a change. She never mentioned the closet again. I never brought it up. We did not have the conversation that would have required us to say aloud what we both knew, which was that it was not time for a change and we both knew what it was actually time for and only one of us had decided to listen. That was February. It's been 8 months. I have opened that closet probably 300 times since she left. Every time I use the two-handed technique on the door and pull the cord and the coats and the bedding and the box of books are exactly where they should be. I have never heard it again. Not once in 8 months. I don't know what that means. I have theories. I have thought about it more than I have thought about most things in my adult life, and I have not landed on anything that fully accounts for all the variables, the name specifically. The specific name. Whatever was in that closet, whatever produced that voice in that register on that Saturday in October, it had access to something private. Something that belonged to a version of me that predated this city, this apartment, this life. That's the part that doesn't resolve. You can propose explanations for a voice in a closet. You can propose explanations for an unexplained sound in an old building with thin walls and unpredictable acoustics. You cannot propose a satisfying explanation for how the sound knew what to call me. I still live here. I want to be clear about that because people always ask, the same way they asked her, the same way anyone asks when they hear the shape of a story like this, why didn't you leave, what were you thinking, how do you sleep? Fine is the answer to the last one. I sleep fine. The loft is warm now that it's summer and the floor is less cold and I've taken over her half of the plants and most of them are still alive, which I take as a minor personal victory. The cast iron pan I replaced. The closet is still on my side, still slightly off its track, still requiring the two-handed technique, still containing exactly what it should contain and nothing else. I stayed because it is my home and because I refuse to be managed out of my own life by something I cannot name or verify or understand. That is the reason, and it is a complete reason, and I am aware that it is also exactly the kind of thing a person says when they are not ready to admit the other reason. The other reason is simpler. Whatever it was, it knew me, knew a name I thought was buried, a name from a geography I had closed behind me, a name that belonged to a younger version of me who no longer exists in any practical sense. And some part of me, the part one do not examine too carefully in the light, is still waiting. Not afraid. Waiting. to find out what it wanted to say next. The crayons were the thing that stayed with me, not the singing, not what my daughter said afterward, which was the part that everyone focuses on when I tell this, the part that makes people go quiet over their drinks and change the subject. The crayons. The specific image of her sitting at the kitchen table on a bright Saturday afternoon in October with her crayons spread out in that particular explosion of color that 6-year-olds produce without thinking about it. Reds and yellows and a green she always called the good green, to distinguish it from the other green she didn't like. Her tongue at the corner of her mouth, the way it went when she was concentrating, her feet not quite reaching the floor, swinging slightly. That image. That completely ordinary, completely safe, completely lit up with afternoon sun image. And above it, coming through the ceiling, her voice. I need to back up. We had been in the house for 2 years. Modern build, open plan ground floor, the kind of house where the kitchen and the living room are one continuous space and the light moves through it all day as the sun crosses. We had chosen it specifically for that. My wife and I are both people who need light the way some people need coffee functionally as a baseline requirement. The house had it. South-facing, big windows, the kitchen catching the afternoon sun from about 1 o'clock onward. We had a round table by the window that we used for everything. Meals, homework, my wife's paperwork, my daughter's drawing. And on weekend afternoons it was where she would install herself for hours with her crayons and her paper and her elaborate inner world that she occasionally allowed us to glimpse. That Saturday she had been drawing since lunch. It was about 2:30. My wife was at the kitchen counter behind her going through some work she had brought home. A coffee going cold beside her laptop the way it always did. I was on the living room side, about 10 feet away, doing something on my phone that I cannot now remember and that clearly did not matter. The three of us in the same space, comfortable, quiet, the autumn sun doing what autumn sun does in the afternoon. That low, specific gold that makes everything look like it is being filmed. My daughter was drawing a horse. She was always drawing horses. She had a method she had developed entirely independently, and that bore no technical resemblance to a horse, but that she executed with total confidence every time. A circle for lines, a tale that was more suggestion than structure. She narrated quietly to herself while she drew, half under her breath, the way she had done since she could talk. A continuous low commentary on whatever was happening in the picture's internal world. I was not fully paying attention, and then my wife looked up from her laptop. I noticed her notice something before I heard it myself. She had a specific stillness she went into when her attention caught on something unexpected. Not alarmed, not immediately, just recalibrated. Tuned to a different frequency. I looked at her and she was looking at the ceiling and her coffee mug was halfway to her mouth and not moving. Then I heard it, singing, coming from upstairs, from our daughter's bedroom directly above the kitchen. I knew the specific geography of sound in that house the way you know any house you have lived in for 2 years, and the sound was coming from that room, from that corner of that room, with the particular quality of sound that travels through a floor rather than around walls. A child's voice, high and clear and unself-conscious. A simple melody, 4 or 5 notes repeating, the kind of melodic fragment a child invents rather than learns, without the structure of a real song, without resolution, just the same small phrase turning over and over. My wife said, quietly, not alarmed yet, "Is she upstairs?" I looked at my daughter. She was at the table, 2 feet from where I was standing. Crayons in her hand, the good green specifically, her tongue at the corner of her mouth, her feet swinging. She had not moved. She had not gone upstairs and come back down. She was sitting exactly where she had been sitting for the past 90 minutes, and she was drawing her horse, and she was right there in front of me. And her voice was coming through the ceiling. I want to be precise about this because precision is the only tool I have. It was her voice. Not a voice similar to hers. Not a voice in the register of a child her age. Her voice. I have heard that voice every day for 6 years. I know it the way I know my own name, the way I know my wife's laugh, the way you know the things that have been the soundtrack of your daily life for years without choosing to memorize them. You just know them. They are in you. And the voice coming through the ceiling of my kitchen was my daughter's voice, and my daughter was sitting at the table in front of me, holding the good green crayon. My wife and I looked at each other. There is a specific kind of communication that happens between two people who have been together long enough and know each other well enough that the look itself carries full sentences. The look we exchanged across that kitchen in that moment carried something like, "You hear that? And yes. And that is her voice. And yes. And she is right here. And yes." And neither of us said any of it aloud. The singing continued. The same phrase, the same 4 or 5 notes, unhurried, completely absorbed. The sound of a child alone in a room doing something that pleased her. I said my daughter's name. She looked up from her drawing. Not startled, not guiltily, just the ordinary look of a child interrupted from something engaging. She looked at me and then she looked at her mother and registered our faces with the frank assessment of a 6-year-old who knows when adults are behaving strangely. I asked her what she was drawing. "A horse," she said. "Obviously." She showed me. The circle, the 4 lines, the suggestion of a tail. I asked her if she had been upstairs at all this afternoon. She shook her head. She had been drawing, she said. She had been here the whole time. My wife asked, in the careful voice she used when she was trying not to put something into a question, if she could hear anything. My daughter cocked her head. Listened, or appeared to listen, in the way a child performs listening to satisfy an adult while also finding the whole exercise slightly baffling. The singing was still happening. Clear, audible, coming through the ceiling directly above where we were all standing. She looked at the ceiling, then back at us. Then she said, in the tone of someone conveying information so obvious it barely warranted conveying, "That's just the one that watches." Then she looked back down at her drawing. Just like that. The tone of a child referring to something as established and familiar as a piece of furniture. The one that watches. No article that suggested novelty. No hesitation that suggested she was inventing. The phrasing of someone describing something they had known about for some time and had simply never thought to mention because it had never come up. My wife said very carefully, "The one that watches what?" My daughter said, "Me. While I'm drawing, mostly. Sometimes at night, but it's not scary." She selected a different crayon. Yellow. She began adding something to the horse that appeared to be either a mane or wings or both. My wife's hand found my arm. I went upstairs. I am going to tell you exactly what I did and exactly what I found in the specific sequence because I have replayed this enough times that the sequence matters to me. I went up the stairs. I walked down the hallway. I put my hand on my daughter's bedroom door. I pushed it open. The singing stopped. Not faded. Not trailed off the way a voice trails off when a person realizes they are no longer alone. Stopped. Between one moment and the next. The room was full of afternoon light. Her window faced west and the sun was in that part of the sky that poured directly through it at this time of day, and everything in the room was lit up and specific and ordinary. Her bed with its complicated arrangement of stuffed animals that had a hierarchy I had never fully decoded. Her bookshelf. Her drawings pinned to the corkboard above the desk. Horses and more horses and one ambitious attempt at a dragon. Her small desk chair, pushed in. The room was empty. I stood in the doorway and I looked at the room and the room offered me nothing. No explanation, no continuation, no evidence that anything had been in it. Just light and stuffed animals and the particular beloved disorder of a 6-year-old's private space. I stood there for what felt like a long time. Then I went back downstairs. My daughter was drawing. My wife was standing exactly where I had left her with her hand still slightly extended from where it had been on my arm. She looked at me. I looked at her. The afternoon sun was still doing what it had been doing. That low October gold. The kitchen still warm with it. The crayons still spread across the table in their explosion of color. I sat down at the table. My daughter showed me the horse without being asked. It had wings. She had decided. I looked at it for a moment and then I looked at the ceiling and then I looked at my daughter, at her completely untroubled face, her feet swinging, the good green crayon now back in her hand, and I felt something that I have not been able to name cleanly in the time since. Not fear exactly. Not relief. Something that lives in the space between the two. The feeling of a question you have decided, for reasons you could not fully defend under examination, not to ask. We did not discuss it at dinner. We put her to bed at the usual time and she kissed us both and told me the horse was going to be called something that sounded like a word she had invented and she was asleep within 10 minutes, completely peaceful, her breathing the slow and even breathing of a child with an entirely clear conscience. My wife and I sat in the kitchen afterward. She asked me if I thought we should talk to someone. I said I didn't know. She asked me if I thought it had happened before. I said I thought it probably had. She looked at her cold coffee and then at the ceiling and then she said it wasn't scary. I said, yeah. We sat with that. My daughter is still drawing horses. The one she finished that afternoon is on the corkboard above her desk. Wings and all. She has not mentioned the one that watches again. Not in the weeks since, not in any of the careful and lateral ways I have tried to approach it. She either does not think it is worth discussing or she has decided, with the sovereign judgment of a 6-year-old, that it is not something she is going to share with us. I have not gone back into that room at that time of day. Not because I am afraid of what I will find. Because I am afraid of what I won't. Of standing in that doorway again with the west light coming through the window and the stuffed animals arranged in their undecoded hierarchy and the silence where the singing was, and having to carry home the specific weight of a room that has just been quietly, completely emptied. She said it wasn't scary. I keep returning to that. The flatness of it. The way it was not reassurance. She was not reassuring us. She was 6 years old and she was drawing a horse and we were the ones who were frightened. Not her. She was just reporting. Just conveying, in the matter-of-fact register she used for things that simply were, that the thing upstairs was not scary. She didn't say it was good. She didn't say that at all. You just heard 8 stories. 8 real people, 8 ordinary houses, 8 moments when the familiar geometry of home stopped making sense. No conclusions. No explanations. No comfort. Just the sounds that still haven't been explained, and the people still living or trying to live inside them. This is Bleak Fears. Stay frightened.